The first Black Hawk went down at 3:43 p.m. It didn't explode, it didn't vanish. It just dropped. A tail rotor hit by an RPG. The whole thing started spinning, until it clipped a building and slammed into the narrow, dusty streets of Mogadishu. 5 men died instantly. One of them was the pilot, Cliff Elvis Wolcott, and that moment when Super 6-1 crashed changed everything. What was supposed to be a 1-hour raid turned into a brutal 18-hour street battle. 18 Americans killed, dozens more wounded, hundreds of Somali casualties. It became one of the most infamous missions in modern U.S. military history, and it all started with a warlord, a famine, and a plan that went very, very wrong. This is the story of the Battle of Mogadishu, the mission they later called Black Hawk Down. Somalia, 1993. The country was starving. Literally. A brutal civil war had shattered the nation after the fall of dictator Mohammed Siad Barre in 1991. Clan warlords fought for control, and the capital, Mogadishu, had become a lawless battlefield. Food aid was being hijacked. Supplies meant for starving civilians were being stolen by militias. One man in particular was blamed for much of the chaos: Mohammed Farah Aidid. A powerful warlord and self-declared president, Aidid's forces routinely attacked UN convoys. His militia, the Habergider, ruled large swaths of the city. The United Nations had deployed peacekeepers. The United States sent Marines. But by 1993, Aidid was killing UN personnel, and Washington had had enough. President Clinton authorized a special task force to take him down. The unit sent to Somalia was elite. Task Force Ranger, made up of Delta Force operators, America's most secretive and lethal commandos. Army Rangers, light infantry trained for direct action. 160th SOAR Night Stalkers, helicopter pilots known for flying into the worst conditions imaginable. And support elements, including SEALs, Air Force pararescue men, and intelligence officers. They arrived in Mogadishu in late August 1993 with one mission: capture Aidid. Or, failing that, cripple his command structure. On October 3rd, they got a tip. 2 of Aidid's top lieutenants were meeting in a house near the Bakara market. The decision was made. Go in. Fast, precise, 1 hour in and out. But nothing in Somalia ever went according to plan. At 3:32 p.m., Black Hawks lifted off from the airfield on the coast. 6 helicopters carried Delta operators who would fast rope onto the target building. 12 Rangers were deployed in 4 chalks to secure the perimeter. Ground convoys of Humvees and trucks would pick up the detainees and extract everyone. They rehearsed it dozens of times. The kind of operation that should have been routine. But as soon as the birds were overhead, gunfire erupted. Somali militia were everywhere. Armed with AK-47s, RPGs, machine guns, they opened fire from alleys, rooftops, windows, and then the first Black Hawk was hit. Super 6-1, flown by Cliff Wolcott and his co-pilot Ray Frank, took an RPG hit to its tail rotor. The aircraft spun wildly, lost altitude, and slammed into the city. Delta operators and Rangers rushed to secure the crash site. But the area was crawling with militia. Hundreds of armed fighters converged on the downed bird. Meanwhile, command had a problem. They couldn't just leave the crash, so they rerouted assets. The convoys were told to head for the site. More helicopters circled above. Then came the second hit. At 4:40 p.m., another Black Hawk, Super 6-4, was shot down. This one piloted by Chief Warrant Officer Mike Durant. As the helicopter crashed, Durant sent a mayday over the radio. His last words before the signal cut: "We're going in hard." Delta snipers. Gary Gordon and Randy Shugart, aboard a nearby bird, volunteered to defend the crash. Command was hesitant. Too dangerous. But Gordon asked again, and again. Permission granted. They fast roped in, 2 men against hundreds. They fought until they were out of ammo. They died protecting Durant. He was taken alive, captured by Aidid's militia. Back at the first crash site, the situation was worse. Dozens of Rangers and Delta operators were pinned down. They were trying to extract the wounded, returning fire, calling for resupply. But the Humvee convoys were lost. The streets of Mogadishu were a maze. And no GPS, no digital maps. Ambushes sprung up around every corner. Vehicles were hit by RPGs, engines destroyed, drivers shot. The roads were blocked. The radios jammed with overlapping calls for help. Night fell, and the Americans were still trapped. By midnight, the call went out for reinforcements. A multinational rescue force, including U.S. troops, Pakistani UN soldiers with tanks, and Malaysian armored vehicles, assembled to go in. But the mission had changed. It was no longer a raid. It was a rescue. At dawn, they finally reached the crash site. Survivors, bloodied, exhausted, out of ammo, were pulled from the rubble and loaded into APCs. Some had been fighting for nearly 18 hours straight. One group, led by Ranger Matt Eversman, had gone the entire night without water or food, low on ammunition, and surrounded. They called it the Mogadishu Mile. The last stretch of road they had to run on foot, under fire, to reach safety. In the end, 18 Americans were killed. More than 70 wounded. Hundreds of Somali casualties, though the exact number is unknown. Mike Durant was held captive for 11 days before being released. The bodies of Gordon and Shugart were recovered days later. Both men were posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. Back home, Americans were stunned. Footage emerged of angry Somali crowds dragging U.S. soldiers' bodies through the streets. The images shocked the world. Support for the mission evaporated overnight. President Clinton ordered a withdrawal. Within months, U.S. forces left Somalia entirely. Aidid was never captured. He died 2 years later from wounds sustained in a firefight with rival clans. But the damage was done. The mission, intended to stabilize a nation, had instead fractured public support for intervention, and its legacy would linger. Some believe the events in Mogadishu made U.S. leaders hesitant to commit ground troops later in Rwanda, or even early in Afghanistan. The story was later told in Mark Bowden's book, Black Hawk Down, and in Ridley Scott's 2001 film adaptation. But those versions, while dramatic, never captured the full scope of what happened. Because it wasn't just a firefight. It was a collapse of planning, logistics, and command coordination. It was bravery in the face of chaos, sacrifice under impossible odds, loyalty that refused to abandon the fallen. The men who fought in Mogadishu didn't do it for politics. They did it for the guy next to them. Today, many of those who survived still carry the wounds, some visible, some not. They don't see themselves as heroes. But for 18 hours, in a hostile city, surrounded and outnumbered, they fought anyway, because that's what soldiers do. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.